You love your caffeine, but you think it's been ruining your sleep. When you use caffeine the wrong way, it makes it harder to fall asleep, stay asleep, get good quality sleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. So in today's video, I want to give you a two-step framework on how to use caffeine correctly so it doesn't interfere with your sleep, but actually supports high quality sleep. So it amplifies your energy and performance rather than take from it. And so it improves your mood rather than making you feel irritable and anxious. And before we get started, I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Trevor, and I help growing entrepreneurs and working professionals achieve consistent, high-quality sleep. So how does caffeine actually work? And before we understand caffeine, we have to understand adenosine. And adenosine is this molecule that builds up and it makes us sleepy. And at first, in the morning, we have low levels of adenosine, but as we progress throughout the day, our adenosine accumulates. And after a certain period, we either fall asleep or have a strong urge to fall asleep because there's so much sleep pressure or adenosine built up in our bodies. And how caffeine works is caffeine blocks adenosine from being able to latch on to adenosine receptors. And this temporarily makes new adenosine ineffective to our bodies. It temporarily masks our sleepiness and gives the illusion that we have some energy. But what happens is once the caffeine wears off, we have this caffeine crash. And what's happening is the caffeine disappears and all that adenosine that has been accumulating in the background goes and latches on to these adenosine receptors. So we get an increased influx of adenosine, and this makes us feel really tired all at once, giving us the caffeine crash. And when we use caffeine incorrectly in the evening or afternoon, it inhibits adenosine's ability to work effectively on our body. It makes it harder for our body to turn off those wake promoting systems and turn on those sleep promoting systems at night. And this is a huge problem because it makes it harder to fall asleep. It increases our nocturnal wake ups. It makes our sleep quality worse, and it makes us feel less refreshed in the morning. And during the daytime, when you use caffeine incorrectly, it can make you feel more anxious, irritable, contribute to an overactive nervous system, make you feel like you're always on. And the combination of poor quality sleep and these daytime symptoms can contribute to worse mental performance, worse energy, worse mood, and overall worse quality of life. So why is caffeine affecting us so negatively? Why is it ruining our sleep? Why is it making us feel more anxious, more irritable, and contributing to an overactive nervous system? And the first reason is because your caffeine timing is wrong. Now, the first mistake you might be making is you have caffeine right when you wake up. And when you do this, it blunts this natural cortisol spike. And when you blunt this natural cortisol spike, it leads to worse morning energy and a bigger caffeine crash. Now, the reason it leads to worse morning energy is because cortisol is much more powerful than caffeine. But the reason it doesn't feel like that right now is because you're so dependent on caffeine. Now, the reason for why you get a bigger caffeine crash is because this natural cortisol spike helps clear out any residual adenosine that wasn't cleared out during sleep. So when you have caffeine and the caffeine wears off later in the day, not only does the adenosine that's been accumulating in the morning latch back on to those receptors, but that adenosine that wasn't cleared out from this natural cortisol spike also latches on to those receptors. And this leads to a massive energy crash. Now, the second mistake you might be making is you're drinking caffeine in the late afternoon or in the evening. And I understand you might need caffeine for an important meeting, to finish up a big project, for a good workout. But caffeine doesn't exit your system when you have your caffeine crash. It actually lingers. And caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours. So when you ingest a cup of coffee at 4 p.m., you're ingesting about 100 milligrams of caffeine. And 6 hours later, 50 milligrams of caffeine is still circulating in your system at 10 p.m. You still have half a cup of coffee at 10 p.m. when you're probably trying to fall asleep. And then another 6 hours later, the quarter life of caffeine, you still have 25 milligrams of caffeine in your system. That's about a fourth cup of a coffee still at your system at 4 a.m. And like we learned, caffeine inhibits the ability of adenosine to work effectively. It makes it harder for our body to turn off the wake promoting systems and turn on the sleep promoting systems. And this makes it harder to fall asleep, increases nighttime wake ups, makes our sleep quality worse, and makes us feel less refreshed in the morning. Now you might be saying, Trevor, I drink a cup of coffee in the late afternoon or evening, and I fall asleep fine, I stay asleep fine, and that's all good. But what caffeine has been shown to do is it makes our sleep quality much worse, specifically our deep sleep quality. Now, a couple of studies have been done to support this claim. The first study was led by Carissa Gardner, and what researchers did was they gave participants 400 milligrams of caffeine 8 to 12 hours before bed. And what they found was this shortened deep sleep by 15 to 20 minutes. That is nearly a 20% reduction in your deep sleep. And in another study led by H.P. Landolt, what researchers found was that when they gave participants a cup of coffee close to bedtime, it not only reduced the quantity of their deep sleep, it also reduced the quality of their deep sleep. Now you might be saying, who cares if I lose some deep sleep? But deep sleep is critical for helping you feel rejuvenated and refreshed throughout the day. Deep sleep is the main time in which our body repairs itself. And what can happen is you can get stuck in this caffeine sleep cycle where you wake up feeling unrefreshed, so you have a morning cup of coffee. Then throughout the day, you're still feeling unrefreshed, so you have an afternoon cup of coffee, maybe an evening cup of coffee. And what these 2 cups of coffee will do is they'll affect your deep sleep. They reduce the quantity and reduce the quality. And this makes you feel less refreshed in the morning because it gives your body less time to repair itself. And so you need more caffeine and the cycle continues. Now, the next reason that caffeine is negatively impacting you is because you're drinking too much caffeine. The first component of this is you're drinking too much caffeine in a single serving. Either you're having multiple cups of coffee, a large energy drink, or maybe you're getting coffee from a large vendor like Starbucks, where some of their sizes can have up to 415 milligrams of caffeine, which for the average person is just way too much. Now, the second part to this is you're drinking too much caffeine throughout the day. And I understand you need caffeine to perform at your best at all times of the day, but there are better ways to do that, which we'll talk about in the next section. But what's happening is you have a morning cup of coffee, then maybe a couple afternoon cups of coffee, and maybe even an evening cup of coffee. And what this is doing is it's leading to more caffeine staying in your system at the end of the day. So instead of just having maybe 25 milligrams of caffeine at the end of the day from a single cup of coffee, you have 150 or 200 milligrams because you're drinking up to 4 coffees a day. And what's also happening is because you have more caffeine in your system is processing that caffeine slower. It's increasing the half-life from something like 5 hours all the way to 6 hours. And all of this is leading to more caffeine being stuck in your system at the end of the day, which is contributing to your poor sleep quality. And in a study led by W.S. Chang, researchers gave participants 2 oral doses of caffeine on 2 different days. The first day, they were given 70 milligrams of caffeine, and they recorded an average half-life of 4.5 hours. On the next day, they were given 300 milligrams of caffeine, and they recorded an average half-life of 6.5 hours, which is nearly a 40% increase. And what this means is the more caffeine the participants were given, the longer it stayed in their body. And the last component to this is you might be drinking the wrong types of caffeinated beverages. They might contain sugar, stimulants, or you might drink them faster because they're not hot. And this can lead to a more jittery energy burst. And all of these components, drinking too much caffeine in a single serving, drinking too much caffeine throughout the day, and drinking the wrong types of caffeinated beverages can lead to increased levels of anxiety, irritability, and an overactive nervous system. And this is especially true with long-term excessive caffeine use. So now that we understand why our current caffeine habits are leading to worse sleep, how can we continue to drink caffeine and still get amazing sleep? And the first step is to drink caffeine at the right times. Now, the first step is to delay caffeine by 90 to 120 minutes after waking. And the reason we do this is because we want to utilize this natural cortisol spike. And this natural cortisol spike is going to give us a better energy boost than caffeine ever will. Now, at first, it's not going to feel like that because you are very dependent on caffeine. But over time, as you keep pushing it back and delaying it more, you will realize the the power of the cortisol spike and how much stronger of an energy boost it actually gives you. And to amplify this cortisol spike, we want to do two things. Firstly, we want to get morning sunlight, ideally 10 to 30 minutes, depending on how cloudy it is outside. Next, we want to get some light exercise, so 5 to 15 minutes of walking or maybe some jump rope. And this is going to increase our cortisol spike, and it's also going to increase our alertness and energy. And when we delay caffeine, not only are we going to get more energy from this cortisol spike, when we eventually do drink our cup of coffee, we are going to eliminate that afternoon crash, and we're going to get energy that carries us through the morning and all the way to the afternoon. Now, a couple tips to incorporate this practice. Instead of just delaying your caffeine intake by 2 hours from the get-go, you can delay your caffeine intake by 15 minutes every day and gradually increase it. And if you combine this with some other activities like getting morning sunlight or getting some light exercise and amplifying that cortisol spike, it's going to be a much smoother and easier process to go through. Secondly, we want to avoid caffeine at least 10 to 12 hours before bed. And like we mentioned earlier, caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours, meaning if you have a cup of coffee at 4 p.m., you might still have half a cup of coffee circulating in your body at 10 p.m. Now, this is just a baseline recommendation, and your genetics largely determine how fast you process caffeine. And you're going to want to experiment to see where you fall within this range. Now, to put this into practice, you can gradually move back that last caffeinated beverage. And you can do this on whatever time frequency works for you. But what I recommend is usually starting with a week. So the first week, you move it back by 1 hour. The next week, you move it back by another hour. And the week after that, you try not even consuming a caffeinated beverage at that time. And I just want to mention, if you need caffeine later in the day for an important meeting or to finish up an important project, by all means, do so. Just do not make it a habit. Now, the next step to be able to consume caffeine and still get amazing sleep is to drink the right amount of caffeine. You want to drink roughly 1 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per 2.2 pounds of body weight, or 1 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. And I'm going to give an example to make this clear. So for example, let's say you weigh 180 pounds and we plug that into our formula here. What we find is the recommended amount of caffeine you'd be able to consume in a single serving would be 1 to 2.5 cups of coffee. And it's recommended to consume this amount to avoid any of the negative effects we talked about previously, like increased irritability, increased anxiety, or having that caffeine contribute to an overactive nervous system. And like we mentioned earlier, the type of caffeinated beverage you are consuming is going to affect how smooth that energy burst actually is. So experiment with the different types of caffeinated beverages and also experiment with the amount you're drinking in a single serving. Now, the next component to this is we want to limit our total caffeine consumption to our upper range. So if we use the previous example, that means we shouldn't drink more than 250 milligrams of caffeine in a given day. And that's the equivalent to 10 cups of tea, 2.5 cups of coffee, and around 1 energy drink. And the reason this is so important is because the less caffeine you drink throughout the day, the less caffeine you're going to have in your system when you try to go to bed. And to illustrate this, I have a quick example. Let's say you drink 300 milligrams of caffeine at 10 a.m. That means at 10 p.m., you probably have 75 milligrams of caffeine still circulating in your body, versus you only drink 150 milligrams of caffeine in the morning. At 10 p.m., you probably only have around 37.5 milligrams of caffeine circulating in your system. And as we know, that's going to make a massive difference in our sleep quality if we have less caffeine circulating in our system. And another reason we want to limit our total daily caffeine consumption is because the less caffeine we drink, the faster our body is going to be able to process that caffeine, meaning by the time we get to bed, we're going to have even less caffeine circulating in our system, and there's less of a chance that it actually negatively impacts our sleep. Okay, so to put this into practice, what you're going to want to do is pick a time where you consume caffeine. So let's say, for example, you have a cup of coffee at 4 p.m., every week, I want you to reduce the amount of caffeine you're drinking at that time. So the first week, you might go down to half a cup of coffee or a strong cup of tea. Then the next week, you might go down to a fourth cup of coffee. And the week after that, you're not even drinking caffeine at that time. And you repeat this process until you hit your caffeine goals. Now, I want to quickly recap how we can continue to drink caffeine and still get high quality sleep. So firstly, we want to drink caffeine at the right times. We want to delay caffeine intake by 90 to 120 minutes after waking up. Next, we want to avoid caffeine at least 10 to 12 hours before bed. And the next step is to drink the right amount of caffeine. We want to drink roughly 1 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per 2.2 pounds of body weight in a single serving. And finally, we want to limit our total daily caffeine consumption to around 100 to 300 milligrams of caffeine per day, or whatever your upper range is. And if you follow these steps, you're going to be able to drink caffeine so it supports high quality sleep, improves your mood, amplifies your energy and performance, instead of taking away from your energy, making you feel anxious and irritable, and destroying your sleep. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them below, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video.